Good morning, everyone. So we have lots of people on our just-in-time learning session this morning, and happy to have so many people. I expect that people will continue to join over the next little while. I want to greet everyone from wherever you're coming in the province this morning. Really appreciate your taking some time to be here. As usual, we understand that this is a 2-hour session and that some of you have things to attend to either in your home or at your school. Well, maybe not at the school, but in the space that is now school. And so we absolutely understand if you have to leave. I would ask that everyone remain muted for the duration of this session. You can also turn off your video. That would be helpful so that we only have the panelists with their videos on. I will also turn mine off when I'm not speaking to leave some space for the panelists to be at the forefront. Just a few, I guess, housekeeping items for those of you who haven't been to these sessions and some reminders to those. So that noise that you're hearing all the time is either people coming in or people leaving. So not sure how we can turn that off. So I see the message about increasing the volume. I can't increase my volume. Maybe if I hold my phone better. Hopefully this will work because I had to join with my phone. Hopefully this is better for you. If not, I'm sorry, but I can't increase it.
Join the meeting.
So we are recording this session, and the session will be archived for OPC members on the member side of the website. For the Q&A, so we've got a series of questions that we've put together, and when I say we, I had very little to do with it. I just picked the order of the questions for this morning, but thank you to Gary who put together the questions. So we have a series of questions that we'll go through with the panel, and then we will open it up to some question and answers if we have time. And for that, the format will be for you to paste your question into the chat room. Just because we have so many people on the line, we'll be accepting questions through the chat room. And you'll notice throughout this session that we are taking, we are looking at the issue of anti-Black racism through the lens of school leadership. So we will do our best to stay within that frame. And if your questions come in later during the Q&A session, to make sure that they're in that space. OPC is the Ontario Principals Council, and as such, our mandate is to support principals and vice principals as they lead schools. And we understand that this issue of anti-Black racism is a very important topic. It's also a very sensitive issue right now, and it can be an emotional issue, and that's okay. And I think part of what we're doing this morning is to acknowledge the importance of that issue, acknowledge that we need to start having those conversations, that we need to ask ourselves some hard questions, and that we need to look at what we're doing and what's going on in our schools. And we need to do that in a space where we're able to ask questions, to be open to other people's perspectives, to not pass judgment. We need to move forward, but that's hard. And in this space this morning, we have some great panelists who will help us to dig deeper into the issue of anti-Black racism in a way that is constructive and helpful for each of us as we self-reflect and as we are open to other perspectives to move forward to better serve all of our students, including our Black students in our schools. And this is a beginning of a conversation, and I can maybe take a moment to speak a little bit more broadly to what OPC is doing in this space. So as part of our professional learning series, those of you who have been with us since April 1st, attending some of these, you'll see that we've had, this is the second session on anti-Black racism. The first one was led by Gary Pieters, who's one of our panelists this morning, but we have had other sessions on equity and inclusion from different lenses. So we had one session on queer culture in the school. We had some sessions on inclusive design and on equity. So we're starting to have those conversations, and it's important to us to continue to have these conversations. We've started a professional learning focus group that has a whole bunch of representation. It's not a perfect group. I don't think we could ever get to a perfect representation of our membership, but we're trying to get it better. I don't know that we're at getting it right yet, but we're getting better, and with some help. And then we also have, OPC has put a call out to have an equity and inclusion committee who will work over the coming months and years, I would say, to have a look at what we can do as an organization to support equity, and anti-Black racism is one of those pieces, though not the only piece. And so we're working and we're trying, but this is beginning steps for us. And so I hope that we will all continue to work together, and through this 2 hours, build on our self-reflection and our acknowledgement of some of these issues and what they mean and how we can start to work on them. And so I think that's mostly what I wanted to say this morning. And so I will get right into introducing the panelists. And so I'm introducing them in, well, let's say alphabetical order by first name. That seems to be what's a good way to do it. So we have, and you know what, we have Alana Butler. So Alana has worked as an assistant professor in the Faculty of Education at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario since 2017. In 2015, she completed a PhD in education at Cornell University in Ithaca, New York. For over 15 years, she has taught in a range of settings that include preschool, English as a second language, and literacy, and university undergraduate. Her research interests include the academic achievement of low socioeconomic students, race and schooling, equity and inclusion, immigration and settlement studies, and multicultural education. And we have Andrew. Dr. Andrew B. Campbell, Dr. ABC, is a graduate of the University of Toronto with a PhD in Educational Leadership, Policy, and Diversity. He is presently a faculty member in the Master of Teaching program at the University of Toronto and an adjunct assistant professor at Queen's University online. He is an Ontario certified teacher and has been an educator for over 25 years in Jamaica, the Bahamas, and Canada. He has authored 2 books, Teachable Moments with Dr. ABC, A Spoonful for the Journey in 2015, and then in 2018, The Invisible Student in the Jamaican Classroom. His research and teaching focus on issues of equity, diversity, inclusion, leadership, LGBTQ issues, and teacher performance evaluation. He has presented at numerous peer-reviewed academic conferences and has delivered many presentations as a motivational speaker, keynote, and workshop facilitator. He loves people, food, fashion, and traveling. And I know we met, and I still can't remember how to pronounce your name. So can you help me? You're muted. Hang on. Okay, go.
Think of it as a K. Charis, as in charisma.
Charis. All right, thank you. And I'm really sorry because we met and I asked you then and I didn't retain it. I should have asked you before.
No worries.
Now. Okay, thank you. So we have Charis Newton-Thompson. She completed her PhD at OISE U of T very recently, and she has previously been employed as an educator in Guyana, Jamaica, and Canada for over 30 years. She has served in Toronto for over 25 of those years. In Toronto, she served as a teacher, a department head, an anti-racism consultant, a vice principal, a principal, and a manager. Provincially in Ontario, she served as an education officer. She has also taught additional qualification courses at the Faculty of Education, University of Toronto. More recently, she was a faculty advisor in the education department at the University of Ontario Institute of Technology. She is currently retired. She is passionate about community building and racial uplift. She participates in action-oriented committees and mentors aspiring and current teachers, administrators, and past students. And then we have Gary. Gary Pieters is an educator who lives in Toronto. He has 25 years of professional experience in the education sector as a teacher, vice principal, and principal. He is also a member of the Ontario Ministry of Education Ministers Advisory Council on Special Education. His extensive knowledge base and experience are leveraged through community building, youth engagement, equity, inclusion, and diversity. So a great group of people with us this morning. Really appreciate that. And just before we get started with the first question, I want to read our land acknowledgement, and I would invite you to think of the lands on which you are right now. This is a more generic land acknowledgement to cover all of the lands on which we are. So please bring to mind those where you are right now. OPC would like to acknowledge the enduring presence of Indigenous peoples on the lands on which we gather today across Ontario, and we thank the past, present, and future caretakers of this land. These lands are gathering points where age-old ceremonies of celebration, initiation, and renewal took place. We are grateful to have the opportunity to work and learn on these lands in a community of sharing. And so with that, we will get started with the first question. So how we're going to do this just in terms of format, I will read the question. I will mention whoever's name is beside the question in my chart as a first responder to the question. And then if any of the other panelists would like to add something, please feel free to let me know. You can either message me in the chat, or if it works just naturally, just go ahead and speak. And then I will try to monitor the time a little bit so that we have time to get through all of the questions. We do have quite a few this morning, so I'll try to monitor the time a little bit, but we'll kind of see how it goes. And I want to thank each and every one of you, the panelists, for being here this morning. This was kind of a last minute putting together, but you all made yourselves available this morning and are all here, so I'm very grateful for that. All right, so the first question, what does dismantling anti-Black racism look like using data from school systems on Black student achievement? And Alana, we'll start with you. And you're muted.
Thank you. I wasn't sure that I would be the first one, so that this is great.
Julia,
one of the things I want to
join the meeting
is that we have amazing people actually in our audience who are participating here. When I prepared my response for this, I actually referred to Tana Turner, who's on this call somewhere here. You're here somewhere, Tana, shout out to you. Tana Turner and the Carl James report that Tana Turner did called Towards Race Equity in Education, the Schooling of Black Students in the GTA. That was basically possible because there was data that was gathered by the TDSB. And I think it's really important for us to have data, because if we don't have data, we are unable to identify where the gaps are, what the problems are. In the United States, it's very normal to gather race-based data, but now we're fighting for it. So as we're going to be talking about today, we have school boards where there are serious challenges, such as Peel Region, that has been in the news lately. In general, all our school boards in Ontario, we see that there's consistent patterns of differences in Black achievement. And of course, today we are talking about anti-Black racism as one of the root causes. But I cite the Towards Race Equity in Education, the Schooling of Black Students in the GTA, as an excellent report that really highlights some of the gaps. And it wouldn't have been possible without having that race-based data. So I think that's really important for us to have the data. It addresses challenges that we all know about on this call related to streaming, related to differential achievement. Today we're going to be talking about how anti-Black racism manifests in differential punishment, which relates to things like suspensions and things like that, which we know since the zero tolerance policy came out and was dismantled within Ontario, we see that there were huge gaps in those areas. So I think that's the need for race-based data, I think, is crucial for not only us as researchers, but for all of us who are educators to really be able to address these issues. I'd like to maybe leave it for someone else to add a little bit more to that, or the other panelists. So I think some people had signed up for the same question, so anyone can jump in on that one too, and about the need for data from school systems.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Gary Pieters. I think the need for data is important because the data definitely shows what is working, what is not working, and where the gaps exist in terms of Black student learning. If we're looking at student achievement, then it does show where things are working and where things are not working. It shows disparities where they exist and disproportionalities when they also exist. In terms of staff, it's the same thing. There's gaps when they exist, disproportionalities where they exist. So when we looked at one school board in the last previous webinar, we saw some huge disparities in terms of students where they were, 83% of the students were racialized, Black, South Asian, and other groups. But the staff at that particular school district, 6 to 7% of them were white, and so on. So when you look at race-based data, or you want to see how whiteness manifests in terms of schools and white supremacy, then you can look at data to show where students are streamed, where students are not represented, where there's a lack of representation of staff, and so many other metrics.
Did anyone else on the panel want to add anything? All right, so we'll move on. Thank you, Alana and Gary. We'll move on to the next question. As school leaders, how do we advocate in school communities for improving outcomes for Black students? So this one is for you, Andrew, to start us off with.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for having me. I just want to join with Alana to recognize the powerhouse that we have here in the room. When we started, we saw the cameras on, of course, because of technical, we want to, do less camera or FaceTime. But I see the names, and it's so powerful because I'm not seeing your face, but it's so powerful. We talk about the power of names, and I see the names of persons who I know have been working hard in this field, and they're going to continue to do that. And so I want to give honor and respect to those persons who are in the room. Some of the persons here who have your own work I have actually looked at and examined and worked with. So as school leaders, the question says, as school leaders, how do we advocate in school communities for improving outcomes of Black students? And, I don't want to be a little bit a Debbie Downer, so to speak, but I want to underline before I get into this question that some of these things are not new. And sometimes what I'm a little bit troubled by, especially when we are in rooms with persons who are not a persons of color, and persons who are dominant, and persons in power and privilege, and you make certain suggestions and you share certain data like you just did, Gary, and it's almost if it's a shock and a surprise. And I believe it's very pretentious of us to continue being shocked and surprised about these data, because we know it's not new. And it's funny, I'm going to get to the question, but it's funny because I was looking through an article on Ontario's anti-racism strategic plan, and I'm quoting from it. It says, for far too long, government has heard the calls for change. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission, Black Lives Matter, the Color of Poverty, Color of Change, the Anti-Black Racism Network, the Council of Agencies Serving South Asians, and it goes on and on to list. So we have been doing the work. What we want to do is to make sure we understand that the action is necessary. The action is more important. The deliberation, the intentionality of it is important. And so in answering that question, I want to point out three things. So what school leaders can do, I'm speaking to school leaders, three tools, and we're like a toolkit, a best practice, or a good practice. So three things I want to point on is leadership, school culture and climate, and curriculum. So the first one is leadership. Many of us, we're leaders. We do the equity thing in our school. We do the work of social justice. And what we have is the appearance of equity. And what Dr. Tahari Jackson, who I'm fascinated by her work lately, talks about the topical equity. So we do a Black History Month here, we do a potluck over there, and we do a sprinkle. And what we have been doing in our school is that we're satisfied with a sprinkle. And I want to call on our leaders. That's why I came here this morning to say to us, we have to move beyond a sprinkle. We have to be way more intentional. And something that bothers me is when I sit in presence of deans and chairs and leaders, and then we have this kind of deficit attitude as if we don't know what we are doing. We are hopeless and we are helpless. You are not helpless. Your title and your position that you carry says you are not helpless and you are not hopeless. I want us to think about our position and how do we use our position and our privilege to create change. We have to move from more just a sprinkle. But the most important part of that leadership I want to underline is the lack of self-interrogation. So when I do workshop for schools, I do workshops for tons of organizations. And when I'm called to do a workshop, I can tell, especially in 2019, doing a lot of workshop on unconscious bias, is that a lot of principals have not spent the time to do self-examination. So what you have done is that you have gotten 15 sheets of paper from the ministry, and you have spent the time to read, and you underline, and you circle, and you photocopy, and you upload, and you download. What you have not done is done a check on yourself. Where are you on the cultural continuum? Who are you? Who are you? Are you the person who's operating in a school where you're still talking about those kids? Who are those kids? Who are you? And so I want us to remember, as leaders, we have to first interrogate our values, our biases, our prejudice. I know it sounds very elementary, but I'm going to tell you what is missing is elementary. The foundation is missing. We like fancy blocks and we like fancy roofing, but our foundation is not strong. So leadership and self-examination. The next one is school culture and climate. What is the tone in your school? Who is valued? Who is feeling safe? We like to say safe school. Who is feeling safe? Who are, are your students being heard? And that's why they are disengaging. It's sad that all of us in our undergrad, almost every single one of us in our undergrad, we did psychology and we did Maslow's need of hierarchy. And we keep forgetting that Maslow says to us, if the people who don't have a sense of belonging, ain't no going up. And that's why our students are disengaging. They don't belong. So I'm asking you, school culture and climate, here are my quick questions. How many of your students disengage because they do not feel a sense of belonging? Have you done an audit of your school culture and climate? What is the climate in your school? I'm going to tell you a little quick five-second sad story. While I was a faculty advisor last year, I visited a school. Came out of my car, walk up to the school. This was about November. Walk up to the school, and when I reached the school door, I literally couldn't figure out if the school was open. It felt like the school was closed. I shared that very confidential with a number of friends. I said it felt like the school was closed. The outside of the school felt like there was nobody in the building. I walked into the building, and in the first 5 minutes, I literally at a moment, I was so emotional. I felt like I was in jail. The school felt like jail. Never been to jail, but the school felt like jail. That is a school culture and climate, and it bothered me for weeks and a month. And the sad thing is, when I shared it with persons, maybe persons even in the room, some people, I was hurt because there were people who literally, when I was talking, could tell me which school is it. Listen to me, we have to stop the pretend. I don't do pretend. We have to talk about our school culture and climate. Our students, what symbols are on the wall? Who is being seen? Our students being seen? Who gets a poster board? Our student has to feel included in your school, culture, and climate. So principals, I want you to think about your school, culture, and climate. I was at a school in Scarborough the other day, a school, heavily Muslim students, hijab-wearing grade 6 girls, and I looked around with thirst, and I couldn't find one staff member, hijab-wearing staff member. That may sound like nothing to you, but it's a very big thing that a school full of so many hijab-wearing little girls don't see someone in power and authority walk in the halls with a hijab on. How do they get to say, I want to become a teacher? How do they get to say, I want to be possible? How do they get that? And we see that. That is why when I walk into schools as a black man, I show up as my full self, because I want little black boys and little black girls to see a mirror to say, hey, I can be that. So we have to talk about the school culture and climate. And the last thing I want to tell is about the curriculum. And I won't be getting into the culturally relevant responsive pedagogy. You see how it rhymes? Culturally relevant responsive pedagogy. We like a rhyme and a rhythm, but what does that really mean? And I'm going to only say one thing from that. There are 3 tenets that Gloria Layden-Billings talks about culturally relevant responsive pedagogy. And the only one I'm going to leave with you, principal, is holding high expectations of all our students. Think about that. What does the high expectation look like? If we are constantly measuring our students against a whiteness rule, a whiteness norm, a whiteness standard, what does success look like? With a strong Jamaican accent like mine, I remember my first in Oise struggled. Not struggle because I don't know what I was doing. I know what I was doing, but struggle because I sound different, and different immediately mean less than. You know what I'm saying? And so think about the culture and the climate. Think about your leadership stance when you think about school, because school is not the building. School is you. You are in charge of school. As a principal, you set the culture, you set the climate. So you are school. That's what I want to say at this time.
Thanks, Andrew. Does anyone else on the panel want to add something to respond to this question? So just the question was, as school leaders, how do we advocate in school communities for improving outcomes for Black students?
For myself, Gary Pieters again, definitely looking at streaming practices, looking at where students are placed. You know, as a principal, one of my first schools as a principal was a French immersion school. And when I look at the school, the demographics of the school, it was 3 schools in one, a triple track school, special education, regular, and you know, it's French. And when you look at the French immersion stream, the French immersion stream was predominantly white. The special ed was predominantly Black. And then the regular school was very multicultural. So if I wanted to connect with the Black students in my school, I went and I spent most of the time in the special education classes. When I go to the white demographics of my school, that was the French immersion. And then the regular school was the TTC. You see every single diversity of students. So definitely the streaming practices, that was an elementary school. The streaming practices start from there. So how do we disrupt those streaming practices to ensure that our students are seen in every single area of the school, rather than in certain specific areas, whether it's special ed, applied, essential, locally developed, and vocational. We want to see them in academic, in French immersion, in specialized programs, in the vocal and the, you know, those specialized schools and so forth, STEM, etc.
Thanks, Gary. Anyone else want to jump in here?
I will. My name is Janice Gordon, and I listened to all of your speakers. Gary just basically mentioned the streaming practices, the landscape of our leadership. It is not reflective. What does success look like? And my motto has always been, to be effective, we need to be reflective. And if that is not the situation, then everything is doomed. That's my contribution. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move on to the next question. So Gary, you'll be able to kind of continue on your train of thought with this next question, which was for you. What suggestions do you have for school leaders to develop a culturally appropriate lens towards addressing and dismantling anti-Black racism in school?
Definitely, I mean, in terms of school leaders, it's going to have to be unlearning, because what you learned in your schools, in terms of the schools you attended, you teach and you lead the way you learned. And so whatever you learned in your schools, whether you were a student in elementary, high school, and in post-secondary, doesn't reflect the reality of our increasingly diverse and multicultural society that we live in. A lot of the things that you learned in your schools are rooted in white supremacist thinking and the culture of whiteness. And so when you go into schools, what you do is you bring those unconscious biases into your schools. And those unconscious biases, what they do is they impact heavily on the tone, the culture, and the learning outcomes of the school. I mean, in schools become, I think this was Henry Guru who said this, he talked about schools as sites of struggle rather than sites of possibility. And so when you have schools as sites of struggle, it means that what happens is you feel you're doing the best job as a principal or a vice principal, but you have cultural communities that are struggling to feel a sense of belonging in those schools. Cultural communities who feel a sense of isolation and marginalization. While everyone looks like they're happy and flourishing, your marginalized communities are struggling to feel a sense of place and a sense of identity in those schools. I mean, even myself as a Black principal, I walk into schools that I led and didn't feel a sense of belonging in those schools, whether it's as a vice principal or a principal, I felt no sense of identity in those schools, no sense of belonging in those schools, because the culture of whiteness and the culture of white supremacy in the schools was so profound that it made me feel out of place. So we don't do things like that here. We don't wear hats. We don't wear hoodies. We don't twist our hair. We don't do this. We don't do that. We don't talk like that in our schools, you know? So definitely culturally responsive pedagogy means that everyone, or culturally responsive schools means ensuring that everyone can see themselves reflected in the school, whether it's in the built environment or the learning materials or the staff demographics of the school. So as leaders, there's a lot of different areas that we have to look at. And I would say to school leaders, particularly educators who are white and Black and every other diversity that's in here, to do a lot more reading and a lot more conversations on this topic, because, you know, we all have blind spots, and sometimes we don't see our blind spots. So others have to show the, through literature or other ways, have to show what those blind spots are.
Andrea, something quickly to add to that. Thank you so much, Gary. Something quickly to add to that. And I feel it's important for me at this time to insert what I consider to be a moment of tenderness or a moment of hope. I see principals and I see names, as I said to you before, persons who have been doing this work for a long time. And I remember just past this February, I was on a panel at OISE, and persons, you know, you could sense the people feeling tired, as if we have been doing this for years and they're tired. And the truth is, there are persons who are tired, and that is why, and it's okay to be tired, and it's okay to step away and to take a rest and to take care of ourselves. As a person who does this, who do this kind of work, I can tell you I'm very big on self-care, because there's no way you can do this kind of work and not attend to your self-care. And so I just felt the need to piggyback on what Gary's saying about being in your school and dealing with anti-blackness and dealing with, you know, oppressive things, that I want to say to the leaders in the room, especially the leaders of color, the Black leaders in the room, that you have to make sure you do that self-care and that tenderness in a part of what you do, so you can maintain the work and maintain the momentum that is necessary. But a simple also ingredient I want to leave with you also is the idea that don't think of yourself as hopeless and helpless and powerless, right? You are the principal for the school. Think about who you are as a leader in that school and how you can find ways to advocate, to be an activist, because you're in a system. Here's something that we have to remember. You are benefiting from a system that is oppressing you yourself. That's a little bit heavy, but let us think about it. You are employed to a system. You get your livelihood from this oppressive system. It's hard. Some of you are scared to push back at the system. I guarantee there are principals who don't want to be a part of certain conversation, because they feel like, because they know, not feel, but when the conversation is done, it's heavy on them. All right, so that's I talk about the tenderness. But the next part of that is, think about yourself as an advocate, think about yourself as an activist, think about yourself also as an accomplice. Because there are many ways, and especially the white principals in the room, I want you to think about yourself, not just as an ally. We have to stop, we have to move a little bit deeper. Today, if you notice, my level today is a little bit deeper from just the regular and the sprinkle, because everybody wants to identify themselves as an ally. But I want you not to be an ally when I'm in your presence. I want you to be an accomplice. I got that from the other day. Be an accomplice when I'm not in your presence to bring me forward. I want you to go to advocate, to say, hey, there's this vice principal I know. There's this young man I know. There's this Black woman I know. There's this teacher that I know. What can I do to do? Be an accomplice, be intentional about the work you're going to do. And that is specifically for the white principals in the room.
Thanks, Andrew. Did Alana or Charis have anything else you wanted to add? All right, so we'll move on to the next question then. What is the role of school leaders in transforming Black student learning with a focus on increasing attendance, improving achievement, increasing graduation rates, reducing suspension, and improving opportunity? And so this question is over to you, Charis. You're muted. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Nadine. Hello, everyone. Good morning. This is a comprehensive questions with several parts, so I will go right into it. First of all, I just want to make a declaration that school districts must employ principals and vice principals who are committed to the success of all students. They must be held accountable, particularly for the success of Black students. Their accountability should be based on evidence, based on evidence-based data standards as required by the Anti-Racism Act. And this requirement is similar to the affirmative action for women, which occurred 30 years ago, where administrators were responsible for bringing along women into administration. And as you can see now, there's so many women in administration, not many Black, but so many women in administration. It's also similar to the current initiative, which encourages girls to be involved in STEM. I just want to start with a story of my experience when I was a principal in a particular school. I arrived at the school, you know, we were going along, and then I noticed that the eligibility criteria for sports was 50%. Students who participated in sports only had to earn 50% in order to participate. As you all know, as administrators, 50% is a gift. You just have to be alive and you get 50%. So, and of course, in that school, you had many sports teams who were doing outstandingly well. Most of the teams were populated by Black students. So that said to me that the expectation of Black students is that they can't earn higher than 50%. So we let the eligibility criteria be low so that we can get our students to participate in teams. So immediately I said in the very beginning of my sojourn at that school, I said we have to raise the eligibility criteria. I'm raising it to 65%. All of the teachers who coached any team decided they need to meet with me immediately, because that means they will not be able to have any teams in the school, because they just assumed the student would not be able to achieve 65%. Now, 65% is no great achievement. You can't get into any college or university with 65. And they felt that the Black students in that school who are in sports could not be able to qualify to participate in sports because they would not be able to earn 65%. So we had our meeting, and I said, I'm going to grandparent the rules to the first interim report. At the first interim report, students have to have 65%. And I was supplying supports to students, you know, tutors and so on, if students needed any additional support. And, you know, I spoke with the coaches and so on to make sure that students could get the support they need. But I said we were doing 65% after the first interim report. Then I was asked the question, so if a student doesn't get 65% and they're not allowed to play a game, who will take care of that? They did not want to be the messenger to the students, because somehow they're afraid of these Black boys that, you know, they cannot tell a student, you have not measured up and therefore you cannot play a game. So I said, send them to me. I will talk to them. And so that's what we established. And when the interim reports came, we had no student who could not qualify to play sports, right? All those students were able to play. We didn't have to have any situation where, you know, we were in doubt as to whether a student could participate in sports. So that's a good example of commitment to success of Black students, right? So I'll just get into the rest of the topic now. My first suggestion goes along with, let me just back up to say, I'm going to look at 5 different areas because of the comprehensiveness of this question. So the first one is school day. The second one is timetabling. The third one is eligibility criteria, which I spoke about just now. The next one is career days, and the last one is progressive discipline. So regarding the school day, if we want to do something that is innovative and different and focused on the achievement of Black students, we might, as you know, some school districts or well, school districts could continue with something that happened back in the mid around 2009, which was Eastern Commerce School decided to have a late start day. And this late start day, the purpose of that late start day was to make sure that the day began and corresponded with a peak time for adolescent alertness and learning potential. And the goal was to improve achievement and engagement of students. So they instituted this late start day, and it was, they did that for 6 years. Eastern Commerce, as you may know, is in Eastern Toronto. It is now closed down as Eastern Commerce, but there's an Aboriginal Education Center which is housed there. Eastern Commerce at that time was suffering from declining enrollment, and the student population did not come from around the area. The students used to come from all across the city to go there. But with the late start day, what they found was that they were, well, first of all, you know, it only went on for 6 years. So they didn't have a long enough time to really see how, if it will be effective in the long run to benefit students more profoundly. But what they found in the 6 years was that absenteeism decreased. They were increased, students had more credits, their credit accumulation was more positive. Staff and students were positive about the late start day. There were fewer behavioral issues, and overall, it was a very positive experience to students. The areas in which they did not do well was in the 2 standardized tests, the EQAO and the OSSLT, and there were reasons for that. But generally, the student population did better, and they were, you know, students were positive, they were more relaxed, and then they had some other benefits. Students who had to work late, many Black students need to do a job as they go through high school, and they might work late at a you know, some fast food outlet or so on. They got a chance to get proper sleep before they went into school, so they were more relaxed and they were able to be more engaged in school. Teachers also talked about the traffic not being as heavy when they went into school, so they weren't so hurried when they got to school. So that's a consideration that I want to put on the table. The second area was concerning subject choices. Now, I know that timetabling for schools often is done by vice principals. And sometimes there are difficulties in that area because of how the timetables are, how the whole grid of the timetables are set up. Because timetables, when students pick courses, they need to have a full timetable where they have a first period class, they have a second period class in a semester school, they have a third and a fourth period class. And they need to have choices within each of those periods so that they can feel, well, you know, this is speaking to me, it's a course that I want, and so on. What I've found in many instances is that when timetables are set up, that the bulk of the courses are offered just before lunch and just after lunch. And so the first period and the last period do not have as many choices as the second and the third period. This impacts Black students because we have discussed earlier where Black students are often placed in applied courses in high school. So in grade 9 and 10, students do not have a big choice of subjects. They have to do what is laid out for them to do. But in grade 11, they have to choose their subjects for their timetable. So if the bulk of the courses are offered just before lunch and just after lunch, and then the first and last period, there aren't many choices, what happens is that the guidance counselors will just place the student in a first period class and say, oh, try it out, you might like it, or the last period class. And what would happen most times is that the student would go, they would not like the class, and then they don't have another choice, so they're skipping. So what I'm proposing is that principals take an intentional look at the spread of courses across the day, the spread of courses that students can make choices of, because these courses, the courses that are offered are generated by the students from the choices that they make when they make this course selection. But if it's not spread out across the day, then we still have a problem. And this problem most often resides with Black students who are not engaged in the pickings that are available for first and last period, and therefore there's a problem with absenteeism and students wandering the hallway and so on. Additionally, I also want to suggest under this whole situation with the timetable that the libraries, schools, principals should make sure that their libraries are open in the morning before school starts and all through the day, every single period, even lunch, so that students who need to have a place to go and do their work have a quiet spot in the library. Students who do not have a computer at home or a proper study space or the means to get their work done in a quiet area, if they have a spare, they can go to the library. If the library is open every period, they could go to the library during lunchtime. They could go to the library before school. So that is a really important thing. I know that in many schools, because of the budgetary constraints, libraries are closed at certain times. This is not helpful to Black students. Okay, the next point I already made about the eligibility criteria for sports. I've talked about that already. But in addition to raising the eligibility criteria, I also want to suggest or recommend highly that there should be regular school attendance requirements for all students, including student athletes. And to emphasize that students who participate in sports are student athletes, and school expectations should be that they are students first and athletes second. So they're there to get an education. And athletics is a good part of that, but they're not only athletes, and so their educational side should be nurtured as well, and even more so than the athletic side, because they will do the athletics anyway. And one more point on the eligibility criteria in athletics is that schools should provide organized tutoring and other academic supports for student athletes who miss their classes because they're attending games. Often this is left up to the students. The students are out playing games to give your school glory. You should also take the responsibility to make sure that those students are getting to continue with their work, get support to get the work that they missed. And so there should be structures within the schools to ensure that those students get to cover the work that they miss when they're out playing sports. Okay, many schools institute career days where students get to choose careers and they go about and get to hear about careers. What I would like to suggest and to recommend is that these sessions ensure that the professionals they invite to the school include Black professionals, so that Black students could see themselves reflected among the presenters. As Andrew was saying earlier about the presence in the school, who looks like they're in charge. The same idea for students. If they do not see a person who looks like them in a particular place, they don't think that they could aspire towards that. And another suggestion is that when the career day, when students are choosing who they want to listen to or what career they want to hear about, when the presenters' profiles are presented to them, their photographs should be included in the profile. So the students, even if they don't choose, if the Black students, even if they don't choose a Black professional to listen to because they're not interested in that career, they can see Black professionals within the list. So they can see, well, oh, there's a Black pilot over there, or so on. You know, this is more subconscious, but it's something to let the students know that there are people out there who are doing great things and they can aspire. And also make sure to invite speakers who are in roles that are not often seen by students. For example, a Black female pilot or a Black male engineer, so that the Black students will see that they're professions that they could aspire towards. Now I'm going to move to the disciplinary point. So for routine disciplinary matters, before resorting to suspensions, apply progressive discipline methods. And I know some schools do that and some schools do not. And I think it goes right to the administrator who's in charge of that, or the vice principal or the principal. I don't think this should be a personal matter. It is a matter where you're treating students as people, as you would treat your own child. So if there's a routine disciplinary matter, parents, for one thing, should always be involved. Often Black parents are not involved in the disciplinary matter. They just hear the result. They do not hear, they don't get involved in the discussions around what happened. They don't get involved they're not invited to be involved to see if they can work out some resolution to the matter. They are not involved at all until the suspension letter is prepared and is going home. So that's one thing. Secondly, principals and vice principals must make sure that teachers are aware that you're implementing progressive discipline, because sometimes you get pushback from teachers because they think you're not doing enough. You have to establish that you are doing enough, that you're taking everything into consideration and you're applying progressive discipline. And this is something that's required by the ministry. So it's not, you're not making it up. And most of all discipline methods must result in all parties maintaining their dignity, particularly Black students, their parents, guardians, or advocates. Often Black students are embarrassed in front of other people. Even their parents are right in the middle of the office. Parents are given trespassing letters because they come to advocate for their children. You know, parents are barred from school. So we have to establish discipline in a way that results in people just maintaining their dignity. I've had situations where parents are coming in, or I could think of this one parent who was coming in from the parking lot, just making a lot of noise. She was very angry about what happened with her child. And so, you know, she came into the office. I said to her, come into my office. So I closed the door. She ranted for quite a long time. And then when she was finished, I said to her, so here is what really happened, right? And you know, we discussed what happened. We got our son involved and all the parties involved and so on. But in the end, I said to her, you know, you can always come and talk to me if there's something. You don't need to rant like this out in the hallway. You know, I know you're frustrated, because she's telling me about all since elementary school, you know, there were always problems. And so she came, you know, with fighting words, ready to fight with the administration, because that's what she had experienced over time. But what I'm saying is that happens to many Black parents, and you are the calmer head. So let the parent come in, let the parent talk, After the parent has vented, then you can reach, you know, some kind of reasonable ground. And then later on, the parent will not do this again because you had that conversation. They know they can come and talk to you. And so whatever happens later on, this does not continue. So many parents are really damaged by the school system. So you know you will be getting this. But, you know, instead of being afraid, wanting to call the police, whatnot, call the parent in. And this could result in something more positive for the parent, for you, for the student in the school. I want to suggest some strategies that may be familiar to some of you concerning progressive discipline. For example, if the student is an athlete that's involved in whatever minor disciplinary matter that comes up, if it's a minor, and I'm speaking just the minor matters now. If it's major matters, we have regulations about that. We know what to do with that. So if the student is an athlete, preventing the student from participating in a sport for one game is a lot more effective than a one-day suspension because the student wants to play. They want to be there for their team. So that's an effective way to discipline a student without sending them home on a suspension. Another way is after-school detentions, if that's feasible, because many students have to work after school and so on. But if it's feasible, if it's a grade 9 students, for example, and they don't have to work and they don't have to pick up their siblings after school, then after-school detention is another way. And during that detention, it's not where a student sits and stares at the wall. They should show you what homework they have, and then they go and do the homework. And at the end of the detention, you should see what they've completed of the homework. So they have something to do while they're sitting there. They're not just sitting there twiddling their thumbs or using their phone or staring at the wall. Another strategy is mediation. We all know about that, restorative justice. And again, just to emphasize with restorative justice, embarrassing a student in front of other students is not restorative to the student who was created the infraction. It should be done in a way that dignifies everyone. Restitution, sincere apologies, and then I just want to make a note that if a student is referred very often for disciplinary matters, there should be a progress review meeting, including teachers, parents, and administrator. And the purpose of that meeting is to come up with strategies to support that student. And in that meeting, parents should be allowed to bring a support person if they need to have that support. So that's my contribution to this topic.
Thanks. Did anyone else from the panel want to jump in on this question? If not, we'll move on to the next question with Alana. I'm not hearing anyone jumping in. So Alana, next question. What are your thoughts on increasing access to culturally responsive curriculum, such as embedding Afrocentric perspectives in all areas, including history, mathematics, the arts, and STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math?
Thank you very much for including that question. I know that yourself and Gary worked on this question. This, to me, is key to a lot of what we're talking about today with anti-Black racism. I actually think the curriculum, as many of us have experienced it, as racialized persons, as a Black Canadian, is a crime. I didn't learn anything about Black history beyond the Black History Month, until I went to university and learned about different things. Unfortunately, in our school system, we limit a lot of our supposed ideas around what we're teaching about Afrocentric history, and we limit it to Black History Month. And that's something that we should be embedding throughout the curriculum in its entirety. So I feel very strongly about that I think the key is the curriculum. I think we have a Eurocentric curriculum, which we have all experienced, and it is extremely problematic for racialized students who are sitting in classrooms where you have a textbook that doesn't represent yourself, You have a whole history of European accomplishments where you think, well, what has my group contributed? Well, nothing. That's what you're left with. So I think it's really important for us to think about how we can embed, how do we move beyond Black History Month is really, really important. Culturally relevant pedagogy and curriculum. I know Andrew is nodding because he's going to be up on this next, but a lot of the things Charis said is really important around setting high expectations for achievement. And what does achievement look like? Well, achievement is also African Canadians. Achievement is not just Europeans. And I think that's unfortunately the impression that a lot of students do get from our school system. So we do need to incorporate it in our curriculum. Now, the question always is, whenever we do these workshops, how? I'm looking at everyone in the room, and I'm looking at the fact that a lot of grassroots Black groups have been doing this for decades. They've come up with resource guides, books on Afrocentric history in math, how to look at it in math, how to look at it in the STEM fields. I'm going to give you some examples. We have, for instance, the African Heritage Educators Network, which has existed for a long time, which has done this work. ONABC. So partnering with these types of organizations is really important. Now, there have been other different elements which have been arising, which they do things, and I want to mention STEM in particular. STEM in particular, because in the field of education, I've done some recent research and I got a grant to look at low-income students. And the two labor force trends in the future are that we will need digital competencies, and we'll also need, technology is going to be a huge part of our future economy. A lot of jobs that they say they do not absolutely know that they're going to exist. Like, we don't know what the future jobs are because of technology. So it's really important that we don't further the digital divide by leaving out a lot of Afrocentric ideas that are rooted in history, math, and sciences. So in terms of STEM, how do we do this? There's outreach programs. I mentioned there's many grassroots organizations right here in Ontario they've been doing it for a long time. So there've been, like for instance, Leroy Clark has an eCamp mentoring where he brings in children and they learn about STEM. There's also the Science Exchange. Dr. Emily Agard from Ryerson does a community outreach with youth groups. And those are things that you should do. And I like what Charis said about bringing in professionals who look like those students. So it's when we talk about all these things, it's also a good idea to bring those persons into the classroom. Bring people in who are scientists. And I know that many of you have maybe seen the commercial on TV where people were asked to draw what a scientist looks like, and typically they're drawing a white male. And we know that scientists look different. And we have right here many resources that we can bring in scientists who are Black into the classrooms. I think it's really important for us to look at that when we're looking in that area. In terms of integrating into the curriculum, there are literally dozens and dozens. I just did a search last night and I found just dozens of guides about how do you bring in Afrocentric history into your math curriculum, the history curriculum, STEM, it's all out there. So it exists, but it's not being utilized. And I think it's really important for us to think about leaving today, thinking about how we can actually implement these in our curriculum. How do we move beyond the sort of surface level of we look at Black History Month where, oh yes, there's some great accomplishments. One of the problems with even Black History Month is a lot of, one study showed that many different schools are looking at the same individuals. So basically it's like you learn about 4 or 5 key people in history, but you never learn about anything else. So I think it's really important to embed a lot of that. That also involves Afrocentric and I want to say Indigenous perspectives on history, math, and the arts and STEM, understanding that the Eurocentric is one view. It's one worldview. There are so many different worldviews and understandings of all sorts of things that we need to learn. And I think it's, frankly, my word is criminal, which I say to my students, that we don't engage with those things in the school system. So I think it's key to what we're addressing today with anti-Black racism. The key thing is to look at the curriculum. Are you looking at, when you look at a guide, whether you're looking at the curriculum ministry documents, I have my students, who are mostly white, interrogate the curriculum in terms of who's represented. We have an assignment where we actually do that. Who's represented in the curriculum? Who isn't? And this is very political, because the curriculum is a political document. It's not a neutral document by any means. And I think that looking at the curriculum is key when we're looking at anti-Black racism, because we want to look at what are we studying, what philosophies we're looking at, what contributions are we completely ignoring, which we know we are. Just look at the room, look at the accomplishments of individuals in the room even, and look at how that could be, how the perspectives could be incorporated better in our education system. A lot of our students feel disengaged because they just do not feel like they can see themselves in the classroom. Because they're in classrooms where they don't learn anything about themselves beyond, like, Andrew, I know you're ready to come up here, about the door at Black History Month, or the bulletin board. You see something Black History Month, often they don't even make a good display of those things even. But it's just not enough. So I think one of the things we want to talk about is culturally responsive pedagogy, yes, but culturally responsive curriculum. Curriculum is very important. It's very important for us to be aware of what we are teaching the students. And this, one of the things that's really important that I also address, it's not just for Black students, it's also for white students and students from all different cultures, to understand that there are many different contributions from different races of people throughout history, and also in the classroom setting. So it's not just you know, beneficial, I think, to Black students, which I do think it is, but it's also important for other students to realize that. I think it's something that's really important, and I think that we need to move forward by, I would like principals to really think about what are we teaching students within the curriculum, and how do we focus, how do we bring in Afrocentric perspectives into the curriculum, and not in a way that's superficial or additive. You know, I often talk about equity sometimes as the party has started and we're arriving late. We don't need to be late to the curriculum. We need to actually start from the ground up with a curriculum that is inclusive for all groups. So that's what I know Andrew had part 2 of this, and I'm looking forward to it. So thank you very much for your comments in advance on the chat that I saw.
Thank you so much for that, Alana, and for really setting something that Alana said, Dr. Alana said, I want to underline, is when you said, there's resources there, we are not utilizing it. And that is something that we know. When I go to a workshop, I do workshops, and somebody will say, give me 5, give me this, give me that. And I've said it to people at workshop, you don't need another piece of paper. I have done workshop and I said, I'm not giving you another piece of paper to go upstairs and put in your folder in the second drawer. You know, where you keep all the papers in the second drawer. Top drawer for the stationery, second drawer for the paper. I'm not giving you another sheet of paper, because you really don't need another sheet of paper, because the resources are there. And I also think why I don't do that sometimes is to ask people to invest, whether you're Black or white, invest in researching, because when you do that research, search for yourself, when you Google Smoogle and get the stuff, it's a part of your investment. So I really want to underline something you said. Another thing you said, Alan, I want to underline, it's about Black History Month is not for the Black student, it's for all the students. And this year in particular, 2020, I've done quite a bit of talks during Black History Month, and I've made it clear it's not for the Black student, it's for the entire school. And one of the stories I want to share with you, I teach at OISD, I teach the anti-discriminatory course. So I teach a course that deals with all this stuff, right? The one course, we'll get to that another day. And I say to them, you know, how do you represent in Black History Month? What do you do? And one of my greatest examples I used was a student I had who, she decided to use to create a Black History poster for the school, that conference size, mega conference size, laminated every single thing. She allowed her literature student to research a black person who is amazing. And what she did ask them to do not do the usual Martin Luther King, do not. And they had to do research First of all, they didn't know that black people created all these things and did all these things. So that's number one. She got successful doing that. They had to write about a black person. She created a big poster. I added it on my LinkedIn for 2 years ago. I added it on my LinkedIn. Everybody wanted a copy, whatever. Here is the great news. This student who did this assignment or did this work that she called me, Dr. Campbell, I want to show you what I did because I didn't ask her to do it. She was a white student teaching in a predominant white school. She had maybe one black student in the class. This is how you use power and privilege to bring up. You don't get offended when we talk about race and racism and you be like, oh, here we go attacking the white person. No, it's about how do you use your power and your privilege to bring students. And she did that. She celebrated that. So I want to underline something. What I love about this question, whoever created this question, I want to say thanks for this question because I noticed your choice of word, embedded. How do we embed? Because it's not an added. What we've been doing is a sprinkle and an add-on. And I'm a person, confession, I'm an Amazon shopper for years. Way before shopping, I'm sure everybody in this room maybe have bought something on Amazon that you don't need this pandemic. We are all guilty of that. But I've been shopping on Amazon for years. And something you notice on Amazon is that when you see a product and it's an add-on, I want you to go on Amazon to notice that when a product is an add-on, it's always less value, like maybe less than $5. It's an add-on, and you can only get that add-on product if you bought something else. You can't purchase an add-on product by itself. I want you to think about that for a minute. So we keep on doing this add-on, which says it's less, it's less valuable, it's less this, it's less that. And so we have to pull ourselves out of that and think about how do we do that. So here's something I want to leave with you quickly, is that remember, culture is identity. And so we have to see ourselves. So let me give you one of those, 5 things, whatever, that I've worked with. Number one is that you have to know how to embed in the curriculum. So here's a good example. This is how I do my lecture and my workshop. Here's a good example. You're a music teacher in the room. Your music department is doing a music series, and you're looking at opera singers. You go right into the curriculum. You're going to choose 5 white opera singers. And I did this activity, and you'll be surprised that there are students who had no idea that they are black opera singers like Kathleen Battle and Jessie Norman. That's what I'm talking about. You let the black girl and black boy know they are black opera singers. They are black opera singers. You only do the same 5, and the same 5 pictures are on your wall. You need to invest in getting a picture of the black opera singer in our finest moment and place that there. Take off 2 of the white one, show it somewhere, and put 2 at the black one. That's what we're talking about. The next one is about support. Charis said something very remarkable because she talked about the idea of holding high expectation. But something she said when she raised that standard, she provided the support, and support is important. The next one is also our books. How do we see the books? And sometimes you have to be more targeted, more alert. Let me give you a perfect example. The other day I was asked to review a set of books to see if they were culturally equitable by a publisher. I looked at the books, and one of the things I saw was the word in which the river was described. So they're describing a sea, they're describing the ocean, they're describing the lake, and it was very, oh my God, I went to the lake. And then when they reached to the river, the first line says, the river was not dirty as other river. The introduction to, I mean, many of you may have missed that or didn't even see what just happened. The introduction to the lake, the this, the that, when they reached to the river, it was just embedded in deficit. And I say to them, why introduce the river as being lacking? Why not introduce the river as being everything else, like the lake, the sea? So you have to look at those kind of stuff. The next thing was they talked about women, famous women, and they use a lot of women who were famous for certain things. And I want to ask a quick question. Here's a quick question for everybody. When we reach a page, so they did maybe 7 ladies. When they finally reach a black woman, it's a Canadian book series they're doing. When they finally reach a black woman, who could guess and tell me what occupation was the black woman? Thank you, Marvel Wisdom. Before you even ask the question, you got it. Sports. And I said to them, we are not going to do sports. I said, use the Governor General, pull somebody else forward, use a Dean of Education, use a poly. I said, we're not. I said, Mitzi Unsaid still alive, she's not dead. Use her. I said, we are not using a sports again. So these are the little things that some of you may not even think it's nothing, or you may think, oh, it's not. You have to be a little bit more alert because these messages have been embedded. You're good only for that. And then the last one I want to leave with you is get to your extracurricular activity, everyone in our schools. Think about your extracurricular activity. And I love to tell stories because that's my thing. Personal stories. I was at a school as an LTO. So I've been an LTO by forever because I'm an LTO by choice. Never take a contract because what I want to do. Went to a school as an LTO. I realized that the school had a ballet dance class. I'm an award-winning dance choreographer, and I've done that for years in the Bahamas especially in the Bahamas. And I said, I'm going to be here for 4 months. I said, I would love to start a little dance club. The principal was excited, elated. The principal and the vice principal, both of them male, they couldn't just want me to start it immediately. The teacher who taught the only dance class in the school, which is ballet dance club, that handpick who goes in. Handpick who goes in. A school of predominantly Black and brown Hispanic, also Hispanic kids. When I started the club, kids turned up like nothing. And the teacher turned to me in the staff room and he said, I heard you start a club. And I said, yes, I'm excited. You know me, I'm excited. He said, yes. And he said, oh, but we're going to have 2 dance clubs in the school. And I said, we have enough space. We said, we have enough kids to have 3 dance clubs. As a matter of fact, we have enough kids to have 10 dance clubs because you're only taking a handful. I'm going to take a next handful. I wish there were more. He looked at me, he wasn't satisfied. And then he said, okay, well, I guess, my dance club is ballet. You are doing that thing, where they'll shake themselves up. This was said to me. This is my story. Just so you know, I have permission to tell my story. This is my story. He said, that's what he looked at me and he said to me, I am an award-winning dance choreographer. I've taken kids from country to country to perform, just like you see on Dance Moms. And I said, wow. And I left. The kids came to the dance club. They loved it. I taught them Afro-Caribbean dance. And let me just say this to you. That thing it affected me in such a way that I've always given the best, but I gave better than my best. And on the day when my kids took that stage, you thought you were on a Las Vegas strip, on an opening number, or on a Broadway, because I gave them the best and I support and I brought them up to that standard. Because you wasn't gonna do what you did again. They do look at shaking up, they look at drumming, look at Caribbean dance on, because we don't value that. So some of your principals in the room and leaders, you are guilty. You are guilty. You are guilty of allowing this kind of narrative to perpetuate in your school. Yeah, they're doing a little drumming over there. What is a little drumming over there? What is a little African music? It's who they are. It's their identity. I closed this. I was on a panel the other day, and before I was the keynote. Before I did my keynote, they had a indigenous medicine songwoman, Brenda McIntyre. She sang before I spoke, and she sang a song that gave me goosebumps right through. It's our new album, number 2 on a new album called Starlight or Stardust. I'm going to get the album. When you hear the sound coming through this computer, I just got chills. And I said to myself, I need to play this song. Can you imagine you walk in a hallway and children hear that song being played? And they said, what is that sound? And you said, it's an indigenous medicine woman singing. We have to come to that place where it's not a little thing and it becomes strange. It becomes regular. It becomes regular. And so I wanted to think about that. And the last thing I'll say about that is your pedagogy, people. Think about your pedagogy. So we're talking about what are the thoughts of embedding cultural responses in the curriculum. It's more than a postcard. It's more than a picture. It's more than one book. Think also about your pedagogy. And I say this with saying this. When I started teaching on OISD, I do a lot of storytelling, and on my evaluation, a number of students talk about that I used too many stories. They didn't want to hear me say stories, and they went to attack stories. And I hope you understand that wasn't about the story. It was about Blackness, because the story is about ancestral pedagogy. And as I do more research, because I do studies in First Nations, FNMI, when I did my FNMI courses, I realized the power, the value in storytelling, and the gift of storytelling. And I want to declare, Andrew B. Campbell, that's me, Dr. ABC, I have a gift of storytelling. And every time I teach a workshop or idea, or is a master's class and a Queen's master's class, I bring in storytelling, my African ancestral background, and my love and respect for indigenous pedagogy. And no one will ever water that down. You'll be surprised now that they know that this is here to stay, the respect they have for my stories, the kind of emails I get, love in my stories, because I made it very clear, I am not here trying to pull a stunt. This is pedagogy, master's degree pedagogy, storytelling. So you have to make space for this kind of stuff in your school, and you can't do it in an add-on way. You have to do it in an embedding way. So think about that. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Andrew. Did anyone else on the panel, Alana, Charis, or Gary, want to add anything? All right. So I'm going to skip the next couple of questions because it was Andrew again next. So just to give somebody else a chance, but we will circle back and to give you a little break from talking, Andrew, at the same time. So we'll go to Gary next. So trauma-informed lens and anti-oppression frameworks are important considerations in mitigating the over-suspension of Black and racialized students. How can restorative practices or culturally appropriate supports mitigate Black student trauma and improve well-being? So I think that Charis touched on this question a little bit in her earlier response. And so Gary, off to you for an addition or a direct response to this question.
Sorry, I just realized I wasn't unmuted. When we look at a trauma-informed lens, we definitely need to look at what the conditions of learning are, what those conditions are for our students. When we speak on the context of Black students in the city of Toronto, Black students in the city of Toronto are dealing with a lot more than in certain other areas of Ontario, considering that we're having educators from across the province. So let's look at Toronto, for example, as a case study. Recently, there have been an increase in community violence. And when I say community violence, I'm talking about things like gun violence, stabbings, tragic events, domestic violence. There's also the opioid crisis in Toronto, which is at an epidemic, and that's before COVID-19. We have cannabis legalization and its impact on young people. We have, the hostile environments that young people live in. And when I say live in, I don't mean necessarily the households. I mean going into stores and facing racial profiling and everything else. And the human rights landscape of schools, which is not always ideal for Black students, training situations which may affect well-being and so forth, mental health and well-being issues, social determinants of health, poverty, homelessness, racism, addictions, and sometimes the labor situations in schools. So all of those things may add to the anguish, the draining situations, the anxiety of young people, Black students in particular. So how do you use a trauma-informed lens? Well, I would say that sometimes when schools think that they're well-meaning, they're adding to the problem. So in some schools, there are school resource officers called police. The police in schools is problematic. I've been in schools where I've turned away the cops, but I've also been in schools where I've been traumatized by cops barging into the school, handcuffing students, walking out with them. I've been traumatized as an administrator, seeing it with my own eyes, taking pictures of the cops handcuffing students and marching out of the school with them. And I, as an administrator, is powerless to intervene in those situations when a cop walks into a school and handcuffs a student. But then on the other end, I've also asked them to leave as well. The school politely asked them to leave. So when you look at trauma-informed lens, what I would like to see is a scaling up in schools of mental health support, a scaling up of social work support, a scaling up of discussion circles and restorative circles that allow students to talk, allow students to look at situations and issues that affect their lives and give them coping strategies, give them decision-making skills, give them assertiveness skills to be able to navigate a society that's increasingly polarized by haves and have-not, race, poverty, and all the other ills that comes with it, so that our students are able to navigate a world where they have their own voice and they can be able to see things, but also speak up and speak out or walk away when they have to. But definitely the trauma-informed lens is a strong imperative for schools in terms of the social, emotional learning needs of students and helping those students to thrive in environments that have become increasingly unprecedented, increasingly uncertain, and increasingly challenging for children and adults alike.
Thanks very much, Gary. Did Alana, Charis, or Andrew, did you want to chime in on this question? All right, so
yeah,
I will.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry, Nadine. I just wanted to say I
Yeah.
really like what Gary had. I think Gary made a really, really important point about trauma and the policing. One of the things that we address in our education program at my institution is the schools to prison pipeline. And I think Gary touched on that. And I think it's really important to realize what message does that send for the criminalization of our young people at such young ages. And we saw the tragic incident of the 6-year-old who was handcuffed. And I think those kind of things, shouldn't be happening in our system. And I think it's really important to mention the trauma that can arise from such practices of policing. So.
And I just like to add that on the ground, as a principal or vice principal in a school, what that might look like is a student coming in late in the morning and just, you see in his or her eyes, they want to battle with somebody. And often what would happen, instead of giving support as to say, well, hi, how are you today, or so on, the administrator or the hall monitor, or if there's a police in the hallway, what they do is to go on the attack on that student who looks already traumatized from whatever it is that happened on the road or at home or whatnot. And then it escalates into suspension. When I was a teacher doing a job shadow one time with a vice principal, I saw a student coming in and mouthing off escalate to a 10-day suspension, because every time the student opened her mouth, the person's like, one more day. And I'm like, what is your role in this school? So, like when a student comes into the building, if they can get a welcoming adult, regardless of what mood they come into the building with, that de-escalates whatever it is. And if the student is mouthy, give them space. And at some point you will come to a situation where you can be helpful. I remember one time there was a student who in the hallway, she's late, the national anthem was going, and she was drinking her coffee, doing something else. And my eyes met hers. I was a vice principal, and I kind of indicated that she should stop. And she just stoops, if you're Black, you know what that means, and turned her back to me with great emphasis and continued to drink her drink and whatnot. So I let her. So when it was all over, I went over to her and I said, did you not notice I was saying to you to stop during the national anthem? Oh, if you want to suspend me right now in front of all the students who are late in the hallway. So I said to her, I'm leaving here now. I'm going to go to my office and I expect you in about 5 minutes. Oh, I'm not coming to your office. If you want to suspend me, suspend me. So I just didn't bother with her. I went down to my office and she came. And I figured, I know where you live. If you go to class, I can just bring you out of class. I don't have to stand there and have a confrontation with a student in the hall. And she clearly has some kind of issue going on. So she came down to my office and I asked her, what was that about? And she told me a sad story about herself and so on. So I said to her, well, I can't let you go to class because this happened in front of everybody in the hallway, but we can work this out, and I gave her sympathy and whatnot. But I didn't know what her issue was, but I just know that she is just stepping out, trying to be confrontational. She's a teenager. So something's going on there that I should not be, as an adult, pushing the fire to stoke it a little bit more. You know, and you know, so this is the approach. This is a Black student. It could be any student, because what's good for a Black student is good for any other student.
Yeah, just a quick one to add to that, Charis, and Charis, on what you just said, is that we have to remember that our student, okay, so all of us in this room, we agree to something, but I think we forget. So if you ask any single principal in this room, I guarantee they agree that the students are coming to school, you know, with issues. The students are coming. Can you imagine when we open back school, the kind of issues our students are coming to school with after this pandemic situation? Can you imagine? And they come to school with that. When I first started teaching in Toronto, in Canada, in 2011, one of my first LTO was a behavioral class. And I'm from Jamaica. I'm very, you know, very A-type personality anyway. So I'm very systematic, very rigid. I'm what you call a strict teacher back home. I'm definitely what you call a very strict teacher back home. And in a behavioral class, I walk into class the first day. There were 4 Black boys, 1 Asian boy. There were support work and about 3 adults in the room. And as I walked through the door, I got the F word. And when I said F word, we're adults here. So I got the FU and I got the faggot. I got all of those. And I got them. And my immediate Mr. Campbell, sir, knows you don't play that foolishness with Mr. Campbell. We don't play that game. I'm famous. We don't play that game. But something inside of me says to me, I will never forget, that is not about you. They know nothing about you. They have never seen you before. The first day you walk into the school, they know their teacher was away, and they know there's a new teacher coming. They know the new authority is coming. Let's just hit hard. And when they start with all that kind of stuff, I just stood there and I smiled. I have a good smile. I smiled and we went on. And every single day I walk in that room, I knew it wasn't about me. They were going through stuff. That's why they're in the behavioral class. They're going through stuff. And I poured on love. As we say back home in my cultural Pentecostal church setting, I pour in the oil and the wine. And I know some of you may not understand the analogy, but it's about healing. And it's about healing. I poured in, so I walk in, good morning, everyone. Nobody answered. Next morning, good morning, everyone. Nobody answered. Third morning, good morning, everyone. Nobody answered. Fourth morning, good morning, everyone. Come and sit beside me, chairs far. And as we talked, the chairs came closer. The chairs came closer. The chairs came closer. And I said to them, let's write a story. They said, we can't write stories. I said, who told you can't write stories? Teacher. I said, well, you can. And we write stories and we talked and I came to the place where the principal called me in his office and he said to me, what is your method? And I said to them, I teach with love. I'm a strong authority. They know I'm in charge, but I also let them know that I care for them. And I use the word, I love you to my students, and I use it for days upon days, for years upon years. I had a student that made me cry at my last school, an autistic student who's made me cry. He came up to me in front of everyone. I was totally off guard. And he says, Mr. Campbell, you know I believe you. And I said, what you talking about? And he said, you love us. And I said, yes, I do. And he said, you always say it. And you say it from September. It's now June. And you still say it. And I just started to cry because he knew that I wasn't tired of it. It was real. It was who I was. It was a part of me. I love my students. And so you have to come to that place where you see them and realize that girl acting up to Charis is not about Charis. She don't even know who Charis is as a principal, but it's acting up with a lot of stuff going on. And school is the best place for me to show my wares, because school, you know, my mother's not at school, my father's not at school, the abuser's not at school. I'm free to do my thing. So let us think about that and think about the care and the mental health that is necessary and the mental wellness and well-being that is necessary for our students. And we think about when they're acting up, why? Let's spend some time and get to the why. Pull them aside and get to the why. It is time consuming. Yes, I know. It is time consuming. Yes, I know. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. So I know for the panelists that we have actually quite a few questions that we haven't gotten to, but because there's only 20 minutes left, And there's a question earlier that I will read to you because I pasted it so that I would have it close in hand around mental health. So I wonder if we can go to that question, and I'm sure the participants will have other questions and we won't have time to get to them all, unfortunately, because I do want to respect the stop time of 10. But if there are other questions, we can note them and we can decide then how we address those either in another session or in a different way. And there have been some suggestions for some further professional learning, and I'm absolutely open to all of those. So we can take this conversation further, but in order to be a little bit responsive to the audience, I'm going to put those other questions we had in a parking lot, and we'll figure out something later. But the question that was earlier was, can the panelists address the underlying issue of mental health and whether this is being addressed at this leadership level? And how do you see self-care in the system as you work to make change? So I think the mental health from the perspective of the leaders who are doing the change, and I think we touched on that very briefly, and then also mental health of Black students. So I don't know who wants to take a first jab at this question.
I'll do it.
Thanks, Gary.
So mental health, I think, mental health is health, and definitely there needs to be a reliance on various methods. Some of it includes peer support, professional learning, available resources, and some of the experts. And when I say experts, I mean, you know, in schools, they are psychologists and they are social workers, and there are other people with those type of capabilities that are attached to schools. Some of the documents, of course, there's a School Mental Health Ontario. There's, in terms of the Principal Council, there's Sterling Minds. There's the school effectiveness frameworks that look at leading mentally healthy schools. And there are other resources for school leaders. So definitely looking at what resources are out there to deal with mental health and wellness. Some schools use some of the Aboriginal practices, which includes community circles. When I worked as a teacher, and I still use some of the practices as a school leader and in my own everyday life, but I am a tribes trained educator, and tribes was a pretty far back training method that infused a lot of Aboriginal centered strategies in schools. So building community circles where you sit in a circle or you stand in a circle with students and you have discussions every day. Team building activities with them to build a sense of community. Also looking at mental health from the perspective of students' emotional needs, physical needs, and so forth. Some schools also look at mental health in terms of providing lunch, providing a free lunch, providing breakfast programs for students, because a student can't learn if they're hungry. If they're hungry and worrying about where their next meal is coming from, they're not focused on learning. So some schools provide meals, some schools provide discussion groups, so there might be peer support groups. Some schools provide a buddy bench at recess for students to sit at and talk to somebody if they're feeling lonely. In terms of adult mental health, that's important. So in terms of schools, sometimes we're the only person in the school. I know in one school that I walked into as a Black principal, it was not the most ideal environment at all. It was, for me, a very, very surreal experience. And so most of my support and all of my support came from outside of the school system, because the school system was not supportive. Even at 1% level, the school system pretty much created an environment that was unsustainable for me as a Black school leader. And so I had to find my supports outside of the school environment, whether it's finding myself a personal psychologist and so forth, to be able to navigate all of the ills that came with being an administrator in an environment dealing with microaggressions on a daily basis, verbal violence, and more. So definitely seeking out supports and being help seeking is important, but also encouraging our students to be help seeking as well. Because if we're help seeking, then our students will be help seeking as well when they need the assistance to deal with mental health and well-being.
Thank you for
Thanks,
that,
Gary.
I'll go quickly next. And I know maybe Charis and maybe Alana will maybe address the students part of it. And I've said a little bit before about the student mental health and getting to know our students. But I really want to address the Black faces I see in the room. I see the Black faces in the room. I see the Black principals. And I'm doing a research with Dr. Alana Butler when we're interviewing Black principals. So I hear the stories. So I have access to some of these stories. I hear the stories. I myself is a Black person. I am a leader. I have been there. I have done that. And I want to say to everyone about mental health, and Gary talked about going out for support. We have to remember, I get chills saying this. This is heavy work. This is heavy lifting. This is heavy lifting. You know, I listened to Professor George Day talk about injury. The first time I heard that terminology about doing the kind of work that I do on injury, I didn't think about it until I think about it. The kind of personal injury. I have been into workshops and for 2 hours, persons fall there and like this looking at me. Many persons can't manage to power through a workshop for 2 hours like that. And do that. I have that skill and I have done that. The trick, however, is when I'm done with that, I know I have to go and replenish. I know where I have to go to get that, to talk it out, to get it out. And that's something that I think all of my principals are Black leaders in the room. I want to encourage you. You have to have your support system. We are, you know, think about it. It's heavy lifting. They call it courageous conversation. It's heavy lifting. You and I know some of you, if you speak up, you may not get that promotion. And some of you don't say anything. Let's be real in this room, people. Some of you don't say nothing because you know if you speak up, you ain't gonna move from vice principal. As a matter of fact, you may not be vice principal next year. I teach at OISE, and I can say this to you. 2020, twice in a meeting, I stood up and I said something, nothing strong, nothing off the way. And my voice trembled. I consider myself to be a brave person when it comes to my work. My voice trembled. Why did my voice tremble? Because I'm an early career person. I know that power doesn't want to be disrupted. Let's go there. I know power and privilege does not want to be disrupted. And I see the questions in the chat box from like S. Stephen and other persons talking about how do we really do the intentional work of change. Change is a process and change don't want to change. That may sound a little bit off. We'll figure it out. Change don't want to change. And so going back to you, this is difficult work. We talk about courageous conversation. We talk about safe space. We talk about brave space. But who is the person engaged in that space? It's you and I. Yesterday, I had my first lecture with my new anti-discrim students, 34 students. I think it was 90% white students, and I had to lecture them on like Zoom like this. You know what it takes out of me to talk about anti-discriminatory introduction to a room like that? To faces coming back at me like that? It takes effort and it takes energy. And I do it with pleasure because I know we have to do it. But at the same time, I have to attend to and I'm not saying mental health, I say mental well-being. I'm a self-care person. So I'm very big on self-care. So I will wrap this up by saying to you all, self-care is essential. I rest well. I sleep. I take my cup of tea. I will take my cup of wine in the evening. I will go for my walk. I go for my vacation to live my best life. You cannot be at school September to August the 31st, then start September morning again. You have to take that week. You have to go away. You have to put on a bathing suit and lie down somewhere in some sandy place or buy some cottage in some quiet spot. Self-care is important because if you don't, you won't be around long enough to do the work that you do. And people always say to me, Dr. Campbell, you do this because I take care of myself. I take care of myself. I rest, I eat, I talk, and I cry. I'm going to leave that one at the end. I cry. I cried out because tears are a language. And you cry to some of you, you hold so much inside. You hold so much inside. Find someone you can cry to and cry it out. And then you wipe your tears, apply back your makeup and go and do the work again. That's what you need to do. Self-care is important. Thank you.
Thanks. So Charis, sorry, I have trouble with that. And
Don't worry about
Alana, if you can do it fairly succinctly so that we can just wrap up in time for 10. Thanks.
Okay, I will do that. I just finished my thesis, my doctoral thesis, and the topic was mentoring experiences of Black female secondary principals and vice principals. And one theme that came through was the loneliness of most of these folk on their jobs. Sometimes they're the only Black person in the building, and they're a vice principal or a principal. And most of the staff is white and not necessarily always friendly. And what I found with most of them is that they have their group that they would call. They have people they would call, they have groups they would get together with. And, you know, for some of them at first, it wasn't, there weren't people around, because some of them may have been early in their board, in their career as an administrator. But they all get people that they get together with or talk on the phone with, or, you know, you have all kinds of electronic ways of doing things now. And so they do that. And I think it's very helpful for them with their mental health, right? And of course, Andrew, you said the whole gamut of things that people can do for self-care and so on. So I would encourage principals, Black principals in particular, because you are alone in those jobs, or you know, it's rare to find 2 Black administrators in one building, and principalship is lonely as it is. And if you're the only Black person in the building, and oftentimes, you know, your colleagues do not even see eye to eye with some of the ways you see the world, you really need to have that other group. As one of the vice principals said to me, you know, I just want to have a place where I could stoop and put the foot up on the table and just carry on. So yes, you need to have that.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Charis. You make some good points. And I also wanted to talk about, as Andrew was saying, the students. A lot of the things that Andrew had to say applies to students as well. We need to recognize that racism is violence, and students experience this as violence. And I think that we need to recognize that it's a severe mental health impact to experience the daily microaggressions and racism that students experience in our system. From the time they leave the home, you know, some of our students, I taught at a secondary school where we did a learning circle. It was kind of a safe space circle that we did for students. And I was really surprised by a lot of the Black students who talked about the fact that they didn't tell their parents the things that happened to them, because they said they knew that their parents would be hurt and upset and angry, so they kept it in. That to me was, I got chills that day when the students were telling me. One of our great students, there was this great guy who was on the honor roll. He was stopped by the police 3 times. And he said, you know, in 1 month, I've been stopped 3 times. And he goes, I get to school and I'm so angry. And all those things, you know, are mental health impacts that we need to recognize as educators and principals, to realize what students are bringing into the classroom and how we can provide them with safe spaces to talk about that. So in one school, we did circles where we talked about it. I also want to talk about culturally relevant you know, counseling. That is really important to have people who recognize that race is a significant social determinant of health, that later on it impacts us in terms of hypertension and all these things. I think those things need to be recognized in schools. Somebody in the chat box mentioned support groups for the students, but the administration needs to also be providing that. And I think that we don't want to put the onus on students to do the self-care themselves. We also need to be doing that for them. That is part of our duty of care. Remember, we have a duty of care for students. And I think we also need to, I just want to close with thinking about how it is that we can care for our students, and what our professional responsibility is towards a duty of care for students, recognizing that racism is a strong mental health impact.
Thank you very much. And I will, I know some of you a lot of people have had to leave, and that's okay. That's just part of life these days, any day I would guess, and some will have to leave exactly at 10, but I do want to maybe give a chance to each panelist for final words. But before I do that, I have pasted the feedback form in the chat box. If you are still on with us, and if you could take a moment to complete it, it's just a few questions, and I do read those myself. Someone from my staff goes through them, but I do read them myself too to inform. And there have been some ideas that have been posted in the chat box for some further professional learning. You can also add those comments to the feedback form. In my role as leader, as director of professional learning at OPC, I absolutely acknowledge my very French, very white, very female lens, and I am trying to surround myself with people who have different lenses and who can help me to learn, help me to be more open, help me to think deep about what I am bringing from my place of privilege as well. And so part of that for me was bringing this today, and that is thanks to Gary, because other than Charis, who I met, who came to OPC and said, can we sit down and can we talk about the work that I was doing and how can I bring it out and how can we use it? Alana and Andrew, I had no idea who you were until Gary sent me your names, and Gary has been instrumental in getting me this far down the road, and I am only at the beginning of this road, and hopefully we'll continue with all of you and all of the people who were here today and some of our members at OPC who are doing some of this heavy lifting. So I want to just say thank you to all of you for your candid responses, and to all of the participants. I know and I understand that we have only started to scratch the surface, and that as individuals and as an organization for OPC, although I can't speak for the whole of OPC and would not want to be doing that, I think that we need to work with one another, and I am very grateful that you have helped me on my journey this morning. And so the last words I will give to each of you in turn, and Gary, I will give you the very final words, seeing as this was your doing in a large part. So Andrew, then Charis, Alana, and then Gary.
All right, thank you so much. 1 minute, I think. Change is necessary, everybody. Change is necessary, and change is actionable. So I wanted to think about how we do change. A conversation is great because we have to be educated, we have to learn, we have to grow. But change has to be actionable. So I want all our principals, all our leaders, superintendents, whoever above us, to think about how do we do change intentional and deliberate, and stop behaving as if school policies and processes are something that was sent from above, like something magical, and they cannot be changed. We can work, you can work to change those things. So you have to remember, saying it is one thing, but putting in the work, writing the letters, coming together, advocating for change is a part of your work that you need to do. So don't forget that. You're not helpless. You are not hopeless. You are not helpless. You are not hopeless. Use your position and power. Use your privilege to bring some persons in the room. And I finally want to say, thank you, Gary, for doing this. And that what Gary has done. Sometimes you ask, what can I do? Well, what Gary has done is exactly what you can do. Is making space. Is creating opportunity. Is saying, can we have a panel full of Black people to talk about Black issues? These are the little things that you can do and not realize that you are not hopeless. Think about your last guest speaker to your Black History Month. Think about who is coming in your school to do professional development. You have selected 5 people for the year, and there are 5 white persons. Think about that. Where's the indigenous voice? Where's the Black voice? Where's the Black perspective? These are your power, your superpower that you have to bring about change. Thank you so much for having me. It was indeed a pleasure to serve. And thank you, Gary. Thank you for including me in this process. I'm honored to be here to use my voice. I'm honored.
Thank you. And Charis.
Thank you, Nadine and Gary. Before I go on, so I don't forget, and it was a pleasure being on the panel with you, Andrew and Alana. Andrew, my schoolmate at one point at OIC. I realize that this occasion is historical, probably for Canada, if not at least for Ontario and for the OPC, to have 4 Black professionals speaking on a panel. So it is historical, and it's also the topic that's historical, anti-Black racism, because even though we experience it and we know this has been going on from since, you know, hundreds of years ago with the enslavement of our people in this country, it's not something that has been addressed in any serious way, even after the Stephen Lewis report 30 or so years ago. So yes, I recognize that this is historical, but we are also professionals that have other skills that could be used. So I appreciate and I would like to continue to work on anti-Black, you know, dismantling anti-Black racism, and on panels to do with that, because only we can speak to that since we experience it daily. But we can also do other work. And so just like we say, you know, don't just choose Black History Month to teach curriculum and Black curriculum, and that's all you do for the students to know anything about Black history. Don't only use Black administrators to talk about anti-Black racism, and we have other fields that we can talk about and you know, really contribute. So that's one thing. The other thing is racism is spirit injury. And we have to remember that the students who come to us, the Black students, like Alana was talking about, that student who said he wouldn't tell his parents. A lot of Black students don't tell their parents what teachers do to them in the classroom, what, you know, when people walk them out of the school, whatever. And so when a student comes into the school and they're acting up, as Andrew was saying, I used to tell my teachers that too. It's not about you. Find out what's going on, talk to our students. Black students, you know, I remember one teacher telling me, this boy, he's in grade 9, he's very tall. And she said, oh, he is so scary. And I said to her, what's so scary about him? You know, he's so tall. And I said, well, he looks like any of my cousins or anyone. Like, you know, to me, I'm just looking at this boy. He's a Black boy. And I said to her, I have not heard of any young Black boy shooting a middle-aged white woman or a middle-aged Black woman for that purpose. So we have to look at Black children as we would our own children, because they are our children. And if they do well, the rest of the school will do well. So that's what I want to leave you with.
Okay, thank you. We're out of time, but I just want to say thank you to Gary for really organizing this, along with Nadine and the OPC. I enjoyed being on the panel with you, Charis, and Andrew. Of course, we'll continue our work, Andrew, together. I just wanted to say that I just hope that we move beyond rhetoric around diversity, embracing actual practices. A lot of times when we address issues around equity, diversity, and inclusion, it stays at the level of policy. Where's the accountability? That's another thing. So I just want to leave that as a note. Let's bring in accountability for real change and not just rhetoric. Thank you so much for everyone. And also the audience, I was just in awe. I was looking at the names and I'm going, I know this person, I've read this person's work. So thank you so much to the audience as well. There's some real superstars out there.
And Gary.
Thank you so much to everyone who participated. Shout out to every single person on the audience and the panel members. I know all of you. So it's a very familiar faces of everyone, including the members of the audience. Shout out to Trustee McDonald. I can see Jamia, Isilda, I can see Ione. I can see quite a number of people who I've worked with in schools. Tando, you know, we're all co-conspirators in this, but we're also all Black educators. And so what I think needs to happen is, I think definitely in our school boards, especially the board I work in, which is Toronto, there's a lot of great policies and procedures, but those policies are inconsistently applied to Black school leaders. So Black school leaders are working within a culture of fear. And definitely with the collective of us coming together with community support, what we need to do is we need to work to dismantle that culture of fear. Because what anti-Black racism is doing is it's shackling our Black administrators, is keeping them shackled like the colonial enterprise of miseducation And how do we unlock the potential of our Black educators? As Charis said, we can do more than talk about anti-Black racism. I advise the Minister of Education. So I'm an advisor to him. Every 2 weeks, I'm on the phone with the minister, or before the COVID-19 situation, I would sit in board meetings with the minister. So we can do more than talk about anti-Black racism, but our system forces us to have to deal with it because our system still continues that colonial enterprise of miseducation. And that miseducation doesn't only impact our students, but it impacts us as leaders because we're treated the same way our students are treated in those schools. And that has to be dismantled. And so as a collective voice, Black educators need to coalesce with our white co-conspirators and our other racialized and other diverse co-conspirators to dismantle that culture of fear so that we can unlock the potential of every single student, every single leader, and every single member of our community to be our best selves in school and in society.
Thanks, Gary. And so thank you, everyone. Thanks to those of you who were able to stay on. And I put earlier in the chat my email address. If you're not a member of OPC and you would like the link to the video, please message me and I will confirm with the panelists that that's okay, because what I had told them was that it would be on the OPC members section. So I will just deal with that offline with the panelists via email. And if they're okay with that, then we'll go ahead and share it. And I hope that this has been useful to everyone. It certainly has been for me. And while I know this will be hard work and heavy lifting and require a lot more work, because this is just the tip of the iceberg and we haven't even gone underneath the water yet, it's a learning process, and I'm grateful to be surrounded this morning by so many great leaders who are willing to do that heavy lifting on a daily basis. And I'm sure I have no idea how that even works for you, but happy to learn in that space and to do some of this heavy lifting with you guys in my role as Director of Professional Learning at OPC. So I wish everyone a great day. I don't know where you are in Toronto. It's finally a beautiful day, though probably not as warm as we'd like it to be at this time of May, but I hope you get some time for some self-care today and an opportunity to go outside and connect. So thanks everyone and have a great day.
Thank you. Goodbye.